Toby Lively. He put out a video yesterday where he told you who was the best strongman, and it was asinine and stupid and crazy and ridiculous, and I'm here to correct that fool. Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Jace Loves Strength. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the GOAT, or who is the best strongman. And really, a friend, a friend of mine, Toby Lively, an amateur strongman. As a matter of fact, we have an interview with Toby coming up for you this week. So stay tuned for it. But anyway, having said that, he put out a video yesterday where he told you who was the best strongman in his opinion. And it was asinine and stupid and crazy and ridiculous, and I'm here to correct that fool in this video. So that's what we're going to do here, is we are going to blow Toby's explanation up and give you the truth about who is truly the best strongman, who is the real GOAT. All right, with that clickbait aside, now I will say that there's not a whole lot to actually take apart from Toby's video. In truth, his analysis was pretty good, pretty thorough, and for the most part pretty right on. I do think that he maybe left out a couple of different things that I would like to talk about and look at, and so we'll attempt to do that. But at the end of the day, Toby essentially arrived at the conclusion that Mitchell Hooper was the best, which I guess is the answer to his video, since his video was titled "Who is the Best Strongman?" And then he called Big Z the greatest, and then he called Thor the strongest. So that's ultimately where he arrived. So I want to take a look at some things today and talk about how we can look at that topic as well. And I think a lot of it comes down to really in terms of how do we define the best, which is one of the reasons I think he had the three categories. So when I'm thinking about who is the best strongman and who is the greatest strongman, or however you want to say this, greatest of all time, best in a moment, well, actually, these are part of the questions. What does it mean to be the best? What does it mean to be the greatest? Are we talking about the length of a career and all of their accolades? Is that what it takes to equal the greatest? Are we doing full career accomplishments? In giving Big Z the nod, I believe that's what he did there. And I think that a lot of us would agree and sign off on things like that. As a matter of fact, on this channel here, we did like a strongman tier before, and I believe Brian Shaw actually won ours. Now, we did it live, and you guys took part in the participation, and you guys helped me decide who moved on in the brackets. Like this strongman versus this strongman, who's moving on? This strongman versus this strongman. We did that live, and I'll link to that in the description below. But having said that, since this is just me pontificating, since this is just my thoughts, I'll tell you specifically how I feel about these topics. And so one of the things that I would say is if we take into full career accolades and the breadth of everything they have done, then yeah, Big Z is probably going to be sitting on the top of my podium as the best or the greatest, if we're using that. Now, I don't think you have to do that, though. There's another way to look at the best or the greatest, and that is to say, what if we took all of them and just lined them up side by side on any given day of competition and said, get after it, boys, let's see who's going to win? Well, honestly, modern strongmen would have an advantage because, like all sports, the sport evolves. It changes. We have better nutrition, better training, better equipment. They know what they're going to do nowadays. As you guys know, I have a special love for Big Kaz. And Kazmaier is going to be one of my guys here that we're going to talk about too. Mainly because another thing to me that talks about greatness or who is the best, it's what did that competitor do against his competition? How did the competition fare against the athlete? And in the case of Kaz, he was so light years above and beyond everybody at the time that they weren't even competitions in most cases. You know, he was Mitchell Hoopering the field before Mitchell Hooper was born, before Mitchell Hooper was thought of, you know. And Kaz was the original dominator, where he didn't just beat the field by a little, he dwarfed the field. It was like do an event, do a 6-event competition, and he might win 4 of the freaking events. Now, one of the things that we have to talk about that is both a plus and a minus of the original era, and that's what I'll call them, is that in those days, let's be honest, there really was no sport of strongman. What we had was a bunch of strong dudes who got together to compete in a makeshift competition, and we called the sport strongman. But what you really had was professional wrestlers and power lifters and NFL players and track and field guys who were doing like shot put and discus. Um, Everybody just come together who had some sort of lifting ability and people that we thought of were strong bodybuilders, and they would compete, and we called that sport strongman. But there really was no sport. And so when we look at it, I think that we have to take that into consideration. And I think it's fair to both penalize that generation and at the same time give them a nod of appreciation and an advancement when we do that. And what I mean by that is this: we have to penalize them by saying that if we just stack the competition up side by side right now, they're probably not going to fare that well because we can't really compare what they did in a lot of these events because they didn't do a lot of these events and they weren't training for these things. So you could easily say they're probably not going to do that well. At the same time, if we pick these guys up like Kaz and stuff, Sigmarsson, and we bring them into the modern era, well, they're now going to be being able to take advantage of modern day training, monetary diet, or modern day diets, and all of these things, and they're going to perform better, and they're going to know when they go into the contest what events they're going to compete in. Back in those days, these guys didn't know what they were doing until they showed up. And a lot of the events were wacky and a lot of the events were silly and didn't make any sense. But we also saw a ton more injuries back in those days. And I think part of it is because, again, they could not protect themselves because they didn't know what they were training for. And it was literally just show up and do what they told you to. It's like a high school field day where you're told, hey, we're doing a potato sack race. Go get over there. No one was training for the potato sack race. You just showed up and told we were going to be in one. And so I think we have to acknowledge the fact that they probably would not fare as well if you just picked them up out of the past and dropped them into today with no kind of extra training, no sort of modern advancements. They're not going to do as well. But if you say, hey, we're going to bring them to the modern day and pretend they were here all along and allow them to compete and take advantage of those things, then you could look at people who were dominant back then, and I believe they would still be dominant today. That's sort of the way that I believe dominance works. Is that across eras, if you were the best of the best, you pick yourself up and put yourself in another area, I think you're probably going to be among the best in that era as well. And so I do believe that Big Kaz gets a nod here. Now, that being said, part of that is a home pick, part of that is a fanboy pick because Big Kaz is my favorite strongman of all time. But I do think that you should look at how the athletes fared against their competition. And without a doubt, Big Kaz was truly dominant against the competition. But he's not the only guy that's been truly dominant against the competition. Let's talk about some other names that Toby mentioned. Let's start with Big Z, okay? Did Big Z dominate? You bet he did. To the tune of 4 World's Strongest Man titles and numerous other titles. And so he is the most decorated athlete that the sport has ever seen. And that is largely why people call him the GOAT. But it's not just that he stuck around long enough to do that. It's that when he was competing, he competed often and he won often. So when you look at his records, you can't just look at the number of titles that Big Z has and chalk it up to being, well, yeah, he had 25,000 plate appearances, so he's going to get a lot of base hits. No, it was he came to the plate 25,000 times and there was an awful lot of good results from those. The winning percentage is pretty freaking impressive. And so Big Z was a dominant force as well. Now, that's not to say that he didn't have some weaknesses. And so that's another thing that I think that we have to look at when we're talking about who is the greatest. Another area that Toby didn't really remark on is, what about well-roundedness? You know, we talked about who was the most statically strong, and he said Thor. I'm going to probably agree with that. Um, and that's something to look at, and that's something that most of our fans care most about because we want the competitions to be heavier, heavier, heavier. We don't care about the races. We don't care. And when I say we, I'm talking about the fan base universal, not this guy. I kind of like some of those events, even though I'm not cut out for them. I'm definitely more of a statically strong guy. Not exactly the best athlete, but having said that, I think that stuff is awesome, and I do think it shows who is strong. A lot of people say, well, that doesn't really show strength. I disagree. There's multiple facets of strength, And there's multiple ways to look at strength. And as Mitchell Hooper himself, we'll talk about him in just a second here, has pointed out, because he's been asked about that. Okay, people say that you're maybe not the most statically strong guy, and how do you feel about when people say maybe the contest heavier and then you won't win? And then the fact of the matter is, Hooper has won a lot of the heaviest competitions, like Arnold's and like the strongest man on earth. He's won the heaviest of the heavy competitions. And so when you look at that, a response that he gives that I thought before it came out of his mouth, but I agree wholeheartedly, is that he says when people give that criticism about those things, the interesting thing is whether it's a competition built with a little bit more lean towards athleticism, speed, endurance, or brute strength, you usually see the same caliber of athletes and the same guys who are at that top spot and on the podium. So to me, that does show that there is strength in those types of endurance events and those speed events. It's not like they're being told to carry a sack of cheeseburgers to and from the car. You know, they're pushing wheelbarrows with 1,000 pounds in them. It may not show the biggest weight that you're lifting off the floor, but you've got to be insanely and obscenely strong to move it. And so if there is some other elements to that, to me that doesn't detract. It just shows a different type of strength. But that again goes into back to the Big Z thing. Big Z was pretty well rounded and he fared pretty well at most events. But there were some chinks in the armor. And that's another thing that, again, we talk about who is the most well rounded. If we talk about some of the most well rounded athletes in the sport, one of the guys that we'd have to look at would be the Dragon, Martins Licis. Now, I'm not going to put him on my Mount Rushmore here. And I'm not going to say that Martins Licis is the greatest of all time or the best strongman of all time. But I respect him, and I think most of us do as well, even though we see that injuries have taken their toll on him, and the best Martins is probably behind us. But this again brings me to Mitchell Hooper again, because some people have asked me to say, how would I describe Mitchell Hooper really? And usually what I say is, I think Mitchell Hooper's is a better Martins Licis. I think Mitchell Hooper is basically Martins Licis 2.0. And what I mean by that is, what was Martins' key to success? It wasn't that he went out there and dominated every event. It was that he dominated the competition by being good at every event. He would second and third place the field to death. He might win a competition without winning a single event, but he was going to be in that second or third place position on every single one. And when you got to the end of the competition, Martins was going to be at the top of the leaderboard. And I think that is in large part Mitchell Hooper's key to success today. He has no weaknesses either. Only instead of second and third placing the field to death, he usually first and second places the field to death. He'll take home some wins, some first places in competitions. He'll take home a plethora of seconds, and when he does third in something, it's almost like a disappointment to us, and we think that he didn't do that well. Anytime that he does below third in an event, we're literally shocked. And to me, that's the most impressive thing that you can say about Mitchell Hooper right now, is that we assume he's going to win. We assume that he's going to dominate. That's a hard position to be in as an athlete, because even when you do well, you don't really get the flowers, you don't get the accolades. It's people just shrug their shoulders. Big deal. He was expected to win. We knew that was going into it. And then if he slips, you got a whole group of people waiting to heckle you and put you down and laugh at you. So then we talk again about another name, Brian Shaw. Brian Shaw, definitely the beloved American hero. And we have the loudest voices, we have the most money, we throw the most competitions. America, whether you love us or you don't love us, the world kind of goes in the direction that America goes. You could call it the Hollywood vibe or the money vibe or whatever it is, but the world kind of turns so as America turns. And Brian Shaw is that beloved American hero. Add to that this larger than life physical body and kind of a personality type that's soft spoken, but kind of a big teddy bear. He's a lovable guy with success. America loves a winner. The world loves a winner. Brian Shaw did a lot of that. The big thing that kept Brian Shaw from being more decorated than he was Big Z. Same thing can be said about Big Z. Big Z would have done a whole lot better if there had been no Brian Shaw in the picture, theoretically. Brian Shaw would have done a whole lot better if there had been no Big Z in the picture, theoretically. One thing that I want to touch on and point here is, again, that's something that I think that Toby left out that I want to comment on here. He mentioned that those two kept each other from having more titles, and they did. But I also think that their rivalry made them both better. So that's one of the reasons I say theoretically. Maybe Brian Shaw would not have been as good as he was without Big Z there to push him. Maybe Big Z would not have been as good as he was without Brian Shaw and Thor there to push him. A lot of times we rise to the level of our competition. I'm glad to see right now in this last competition, the Arnold Classic, Mitchell Hooper being tested and Mitchell Hooper being pushed. I actually think that Mitchell Hooper will go on to do better things and more special things when he doesn't know that he has the contest sewn up. There's a thing in sports about being hungry, about feeling like you have to work for something, feeling like you have to fight for something. And when it's guaranteed that you're going to win, or it seems guaranteed, oftentimes you'll see the guys not training as hard. You'll see them not putting in their best efforts. They're kind of phoning it in. They're kind of going through the motions. Well, when Big Z and Brian Shaw were locking horns, there was no going through the motions. They had to kill themselves every day at the gym because they knew each other was, and if they didn't show up ready to tackle that guy, they were going down. And so I think while we could say they would have more titles if the other person hadn't been around, the other argument, the flip argument, is worth having there too, to say that maybe they would not have been as good without each other. And so I think what we need is we need someone for Mitchell Hooper today to rise up and be. We need someone to be the Shaw to Hooper's Big Z, or vice versa. We need someone to do that to Hooper. And I was very encouraged by the Arnold Strongman Classic. Lucas Hatton looking amazing. Austin Andrade, wow, we have got so much young talent coming up. Andre Fiatu wasn't even there, and this young cat is doing some impressive things. We've got Thor back. His pressing power looking pretty good from these injuries, and we already know what he can do, like in the deadlift and some of these other events. Is he a little bit past his prime? Yeah. Did he leave the sport? Yeah, but he's back, and he looks like he's in good shape. We've got Big Tex Trey Mitchell. There's a lot of guys who are hungry, and they're tired of showing up to the competitions and being told Mitchell Hooper's going to win this thing. They're hungry to prove that wrong. They're hungry to push him out of the way. And they're hungry to put a stamp on things and say, we're still here. And I think that's going to make 2025 exciting. It's going to make 2026 exciting. But it's not about that. This video is supposed to be about who's the greatest and strongest. And so again, I have to talk about the Moose. I think right now, the sport has never, ever seen an athlete like this. I just think it's true. Yeah, he's polarizing. A lot of people love him. A lot of people can't stand him. A lot of people think he's boring. A lot of people think he's cocky. A lot of people think this, that, and the other thing. But I think that most of us, if we're not just looking to hate for the purpose of hating, can tell you that the sport has never seen anything like Mitchell Hooper before. Not only is he dominant and well-rounded, but he figured this thing out ultra quick. He's only been around a couple years, guys. It's at this point that we usually just see guys starting to maybe get invited to big shows and find their way into the top 10. If they find their way into a top 5 position, we're really like, this is a guy you'd better be watching. This is someone who the future could have stamped for. And he's out there winning and winning and winning and winning and winning and winning. And the only contest, the only professional competition that he did not finish on the podium for was his very first one. And I'll be honest, when he showed up and he got invited to the World's Strongest Man 2022, I think it was 2022, 24, 23, or 23 he wins, 24 Tom wins, 2022. When he showed up, I'll be honest, I was against it. If you go back and watch some of my videos back then, or go back and watch the watch party, I was pretty ticked off that he was invited. I thought, okay, the guy made a couple Instagram videos. That doesn't equal being invited to the World's Strongest Man. This is a facade. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. Get him out of here. He doesn't deserve to be there. The truth is, there's probably a lot of truth to that. He didn't deserve to be there. But it only took one contest for him to show, now I deserve to be here going forward. Because he goes out there into the final. He beats Brian Shaw to make it to the finals, which is the first time that Shaw hadn't won since dating back to basically Shaw's first years. And then he goes out there and wins the first event in the finals. And it's like, okay, I guess I should shut up and watch. And then he did kind of falter and come back to reality and come back to earth after that. But it's not like he did bad. He gave a very good showing of himself. But he didn't make the podium in his very first show. Since then, Mitchell Hooper has literally been on the podium at every single competition he has ever been in. And for me, that is crazy. It's not just that this toll of podiums now is setting at 20 plus. It's just that barring his initial showing, he has podiumed at every single show of his professional career. You can look at winning loss percentages, and you can look at his winning percentage and Thor's winning percentage, and they're pretty stellar, and they're looking pretty good. But even when Hooper doesn't win, and lately that seems like that's all he knows how to do. It seems like it's not a podium. It's not a podium streak anymore. Now it's a win streak. But even when Hooper doesn't win, he still shows that you had to really play to beat me here. He took second at the World's Strongest Man last year when most of us had written him off and didn't even think he was going to be on the podium because of the hand. Now, I'm not making excuses for that. Tom won. Tom deserves to win. But most of us thought that Mitchell Hooper was probably not going to even podium. We were talking about it together. Many of us thought that he was done for. He was finished. Even basically as a one-handed man, he was still able to go on and finish second among the best strongman in the world at the World's Strongest Man. It's super impressive. And so, yeah, he's young in his career. Yes, he doesn't have the career accolades that Big Z has. Yes, he doesn't have the number of titles that Brian Shaw has and some of these other guys. And yes, he doesn't have my heart the way that Big Z has. But I truly don't think that we have ever seen anyone dominate the way that Mitchell Hooper is right now. And so for me, when I look at who is the best, I have to say that I think Mitchell Hooper is the best strongman the sport has ever seen. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say he's the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Because for me, the GOAT, just as for me, I'm not speaking on behalf of you guys. For me, the GOAT is not about who accumulated the most toys or the most accolades for a career. It's who would you bet on if everybody showed up to compete against one another at the day of the competition. And I'm telling you right now, if you line them up, Mariusz Pujanowski, Martins Lisis, Brian Shaw, Hafthor Bjornsson, Big Z, Mitchell Hooper, you line these guys up and you say, the time has come. Let's go ahead and throw Eddie Hall in there because if I don't mention that name, there's going to be a lot of people who are cussing me out in the comments. So we just line the top 8, 9, 10 athletes in the history of the sport that you want to stick in there. And then we want to look at the Vegas betting odds and say, who would you put your money on? I'm not a gambler, but I'm here to tell you right now, I'm betting on Mitchell Hooper. I'm betting on the Moose, and most of you are too. And to be honest, you'd be a fool not to. And so if the betting odds say that Mitchell Hooper is more than likely going to be your winner, to me, that's what being the greatest and the best means. At the end of the day, maybe Mitchell Hooper doesn't have anywhere near the career titles and accolades that Brian Shaw has or Big Z has. Because maybe he phones it home after this year. Maybe he calls it quits after 2025 or 2026. He doesn't sound that interested in staying around for a long time. And so maybe he won't have these things. And you could use that to give Big Z and give Brian their flowers, and I'm not going to fault you for that. That's perfectly understandable. It's perfectly valid to do that. But I also don't think that it's fair to penalize Mitchell Hooper for that and say because he didn't stick around, he's not the greatest of all time, especially if he leaves as dominant as he is right now. Because then it's not a matter of how many, like, okay, he has 18 career titles to his name. This is just me spitballing. And so that's a small number in comparison to what these gentlemen have. But if he leaves dominant, then you could conceivably say the only reason that he has 18 is because he chose to walk away with 18. If he had hung around, he could have got 19, 20, 20. And a lot of that is dependent upon what these guys coming up do to push him. Big Trey, Lucas Hatton, Austin Andrade. What are they going to do to him? Andre Foyatu. Such a hard name, and I apologize, Andre. Um, and so, what are they going to do? The next year or two is going to be very, very fun to watch. I'm looking forward to it. But as of right now, you line up the 10 greatest strongmen in history, and you ask me to pick a winner, I'm choosing the Moose. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I'm going to say that Mitchell Hooper, while young in his career, and we may not even seen the best Mitchell Hooper yet, I still think he is the best strongman of all time.